Hi everyone, it's the Music Man with a new streaming plan here. The internet's not music nerd, and today I know it's nowhere near the middle of the year, but I want to talk about some music. There's been a lot of really good music this year, so I figured I'd come on here and share my favorite albums of the year so far. The year's almost over. I'll probably update this when the year actually ends. But at this point, I want to list out my top 25 favorite albums of the year so far. Disclaimer, of course, this is my opinion. I know I might have some controversial or more obscure picks, but let me know what your favorite albums are in the comments below, and we'll get into this. This is not necessarily numbered just yet, but this also is an excuse to just test out new layouts with OBS. But let's get things started. Number 25 on my list here is the new James Wrighton solo album, Jim, I'm Still Here. James Wrighton is of the band Klaxons. He brings us a very wonky 80s inspired synth techno blend produced by the band Soulwax as well through their label Dewey. Definitely a recommend if you like the more weird side of indie pop. Up next, Mr. Oizo, collaborating with rapper Fra, formerly of the group Crookers, with a short but sweet, fun French house rap fusion, voila. Then up next, we have the Magenta album, a mashup album by YouTuber Jazzwave. Some of the most creative, off-the-wall, and funny mashups of this year come off this one. Then we move on to our next album, Pusha T, coming through with It's Almost Dry, with some great production on this one, as well as some fantastic features as well. Now, just Pusha T continuing his winning streak of great projects. Up next, we have Uffy, formerly of Ed Banger Records. You probably know her best for singles like Pop the Glock or the album Sex Dreams and Denim Jeans. But this is her first full-length album outside of Ed Banger. She had an EP back in 2019. But this is Sunshine Factory. It's a very good indie pop record, really showing Uffy's strengths, as well as some great production, too. Moving on, we have the new one from MIA. This one came out very recently. This is Mata. MIA continuing a frankly unreal streak of albums. Nothing that she's put out has necessarily been amiss, I think, and Mata continues it. This is very much more reminiscent of her very early work, but with a more modern flair. The early work took like traditional Indian and Sri Lankan music of the time, blending it with modern electronics of the time. This is very much that sort of thing, but in a modern lens, and it's some great stuff. Harry's House, Harry Styles, one of the best pop albums to break through this year. Harry Styles is really showing growth as a solo artist. I saw this a bit on his first big solo album, Fine Line, and I see it here as well. Well, he definitely is going for that weirder side of popular music in the 80s, which this current generation definitely could use an oddball. Moving on, we have a new one from Muramasa. This is Demon Time. A lot of the big hyper pop names were kind of off this year, but Muramasa came through with a really solid blend of hyper pop as well as full-on electronic music. I would definitely like to see this get more appreciation and some great features as well, especially from people you wouldn't expect to be on this type of album, like Lil Uzi Vert and Slow Tie. Definitely check this one out. Beyonce, Queen Bee. You always gotta watch out for Beyonce, especially on her own streak of great albums. Her self-titled and Lemonade were really good, and this one's good as well. I don't think it's as good as her previous records, but this blend of dance pop is definitely a more unique take on this sort of genre. Whereas a lot of people are going for the 80s sound, Beyonce is throwing it to the 90s with as well as the 70s too. You get Nile Rodgers on this album. You get a Donna Summer cover a reinterpretation. You get some samples of the Nightcrawlers too. Really celebrating all the whole spectrum of popular house music. This one, I've gotten a little bit of flack for feeling as strongly as I do about this one, but I think this album is really good. This is Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. A bit of a controversial album, especially with tracks like Auntie Diaries and the Kodak Black features, though I feel like a track like Auntie Diaries works in context with the record itself. It's very much Kendrick deconstructing his popular figure, proving to everyone that he is not a savior. And it's a very interesting angle to take for this. Not necessarily a self-deprecating album, but a more self-deconstructing album. And definitely something that is not really done that much in hip-hop. Kavinsky, back again after what felt like an eternity with his second album, Reborn. This one produced by Karine Lomax and Gaspard Auger, as well as Kavinsky himself, of taking a much bigger lean into pop music. Tracks like Cameo and Renegade would work well in a radio format. But that 80s edge that he had on his original album is still present, while still toned back a little to make way for some amazing hooks. Black Midi, in drastic contrast to the previous album. Hooks, don't need them. Just throw everything at once. Just give your audience an auditory seizure. This is what you feel listening to their new album Hellfire. I'll have to get back to listen to their previous two albums, which I haven't done yet. I'll have to check them out because I really enjoyed this one here and just how chaotic it is. A new one from Rina Sawayama, Hold the Girl. This is her second studio album. Her first album was very 90s and early 2000s. You could get a lot of that Britney Spears or even a bit of new metal influence on there. This one is a little more recent. I see a lot of house influence, a lot of electronic influence, much like pop from the later half of the 2000s, as well as some actually really touching ballads at the end of the record. The singles grew on me a lot. I wasn't feeling singles like Hurricanes and Phantom at first, but re-listening to them in context of the record, they work a lot better. Send My Love to John is an amazing ballad also. This is, in spite of what I had thought originally, a very good pop album. I'm going to move on to a much more obscure name. This is Makorosu 8299, I believe a Mexican-based vaporwave and future funk producer with the third mixtape in his Sailor Wave series. This is Sailor Wave 3. This is great. It's so refreshing, so poppy. The bass hits super hard. Highly recommend for anyone into the Daft Punky future funk side of electronic music. One from Lupe Fiasco here. This is Drill Music in Zion, probably one of my favorite, more introspective jazz rap albums of the year. Lupe going through topics that have been done before, but not with as great production as is on here. Just probably some of the best jazz rap I've heard in a long time, since like To Pimp a Butterfly, in terms of the actual instrumentation. It's so luscious on this one. We're going to move on to a little obscure indie pop group, Bad Sons. This is their, I believe this is their third or fourth studio album. This is Apocalypse Whenever. I remember listening to a single that they had released back last year and being like, I'd never heard of this band before, so I'm gonna follow this record until it releases. And I followed it. I listened through it. It's great. It's a really good pop album. Some awesome production, very reminiscent of Fun when they were still a thing, but with a much cleaner sheen, you could say. I'm going to move on to Yard Act. This was another one I only listened to recently, and I hate myself for not listening to this sooner. This is their debut studio album, The Overload. Great punk music, exhilarating riffs, witty commentary, very funny also. A lot of great moments, like the "I'm now going to make this 50-pence piece and myself disappear." It's great. I actually have very high hopes for this band, and I hope to see them blossom into something bigger. We'll just have to see with them. Up next, we have Jack White, formerly of the White Stripes. He's been releasing solo records for about a decade now. This is the first of 2 records he has released this year. I haven't listened to the second, but I absolutely love the first. Fear of the Dawn is the title of this one. Just amazing hooks on this one for days. Some great quotables. Some of the best rock music, at least on the more acceptable side, or the more pop leaning side this year. Definitely check this one out. I want to shout out JID or JID. This is the Forever Story. I hadn't been huge on JID until more recently, but then I checked out this album and I'm kind of floored. Just the absolute charisma this guy pulls off. Just the effortless flows. It was switching from one impossible to follow flow to another on the flip of a coin. Very reminiscent, I think, of an Andre 3000 type. Just the personality here. I'm very excited to see what this guy does in the future. Up next, this is 070 Shake, most famous for collaborating with artists like Kanye West. She comes through with You Can't Kill Me, another studio album of hers. This is really good, very reminiscent of Kid Cudi, who also released something this year. Just barely missed this list, though. But the production on this album is stellar. Very reminiscent of a Ye, Life of Pablo era Kanye, when Mike Dean can just deliver such powerful force, and the very amazing vocals from 070 Shake herself really lend to this one. This one, of course, titled You Can't Kill Me. And we'll move on to our next album. This is Death's Dynamic Shroud, a vaporwave group I only discovered this year. I absolutely fell in love with their previous album, 2021's Faith in Persona, and this year they just happened to release a brand new project, Dark Life, here, and I love it. Only a little less than the first, but this one is awesome. It's a much harder hitting, much more aggressive version of the distorted pop that you would get on the previous album, like Faith in Persona. You even get some Carpenter Brute-esque sounding stuff pretty early in the album, which I wasn't expecting. But one thing that I like about Death's Dynamic Shroud on their last and this album, that a lot of vaporwave stuff just kind of seems to miss, it's able to jump out of the 80s in a lot more creative ways. You have some great samples from artists I would never expect to hear on a vaporwave album like this. Dua Lipa, Miley Cyrus, stuff like that. We're going to move on now here to another great electronic album. This is the newest one from Flume. This is his latest record, Palaces, a record that just blew me away with just how awesome the singles were, and then going to the album itself, it's great. It keeps up the momentum of some fantastic singles, some great features on this as well, including the likes of Caroline Polachek, previous collaborator Kushka, and Damon Albarn of Blur and Gorillaz fame. A great record. My favorite track being the deep cut I Can't Tell featuring Laurel. Just shows the perfect contrast of the very angelic vocals and just the harshest drop. A great record. Definitely check it out. It will likely get nominated for Best Electronic Album and by the Grammys, and that's my pick to win it if I had to pick a realistic one. We'll move on to, I believe this will be our number 3 album. We're in the top 3. This is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizards, Omnium Gatherum. King Gizzard, psych rock, garage rock, all sorts of rock, pop, metal even. There's some hip hop on here, reminiscent of the Beastie Boys. There's just so much variety that King Gizzard has done through their 20 albums over 10 years, this being the 20th. They even released 2 more projects this month, and they have a third one on the way. I didn't think those 2 albums were very notable, but I absolutely loved their first album of this year, Omnium Gatherum. It basically covers all the bases that King Gizzard have done before, whether it be garage rock, whether it be prog rock, whether it be synth pop, thrash metal, and the previously mentioned rap rock on tracks like Sadie Sorceress or The Grim Reaper. I really enjoyed this one, and I think it's definitely up there for my top 3 albums of the year. Let's move on to the second one. This is Black Country New Road, Ants from Up There, a record that I listened to the first time. I got the appeal, and then I listened to it again and a third time, and it just kept growing and growing on me. This record is a beautiful art rock, symphonic rock, and post-rock album. It's very reminiscent of a classic Arcade Fire or Godspeed You Black Emperor, though not as indie-esque as Arcade Fire or as desolate and hopeless as Godspeed You Black Emperor. This one's just really sad. It's really sad, and it just lets the emotion flow. But it does have some more upbeat moments as well. A great span of emotions. And the long tracks barely feel as long as they do. They're able to switch things up and keep you on your toes. I was genuinely jump scared by the final track on this album. I highly recommend this. It's absolutely amazing. But there can only be one favorite album of mine of the year, and right now, for my money, The Weeknd, gotta be Dawn FM. Dance pop bangers, amazing production by Tesfaye, as well as collaborators like Daniel O'Patton, Max Martin, and among others. You also get the hit single Sacrifice, featuring production from Swedish House Mafia, of all bands, who The Weeknd collaborated with last year on a single, Moth to a Flame, which is the bonus track on the alternate world version of this album. This one just has impeccable flow from the title track that starts the album off, pretty much all the way through the album, more or less. There's just amazing flow from track to track. So much so that certain tracks just blend together perfectly. How Do I Make You Love Me into Take My Breath. That's basically one 9.5-minute song. Just a great dance pop banger that keeps you on your toes. I love this one. This is a great album, and The Weeknd really blowing me away. I re-listened to his previous album, After Hours, which I thought was good at the time, but really grew on me as well. So I am definitely excited to see the third album in this suspected trilogy that Dawn FM and the previous album, After Hours, are supposed to be a part of. But I'm also interested to see what he does after this, because I feel like if he does another synth pop thing, which he'll probably do, he might be painting himself into a corner. So it'll be interesting what he does from there. I think it's very similar to Daft Punk's Random Access Memories, where even if they would have released a new album, I don't know where you go from where they ended up. But I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you all for watching this, a new type of video for me. I haven't really gotten a chance to do a lot of these sort of videos, but let me know how you think about it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Peace.